Look, I'm not going to lie. One of the surprise hits of 2018, and this is 100% true, Venom. The first trailer dropped for it, and I was not impressed. I was like, this is kind of dumb. Like, I really felt that it was kind of dumb. And then I kind of warmed up to the marketing as time went on, knowing that I would see the movie on opening night regardless of good marketing or not. It's a comic book movie. Comic book movies are popular on YouTube. Clearly, I like movies, both good and bad. Look at my how I review films and like movies I like versus movies that I don't. It's very, I like more than I dislike. I have a very low threshold. But I found myself with one thing in regards to Venom. I had fun with it. It wasn't perfect, but I had a lot of fun with it. And then the more I watched it, ultimately, the better it got. I even went through the movie with like that Venom vision on or whatever they have on the special features, where they give you little behind the scenes factoids that made the experience even better, in my opinion. So yes, when we heard that Venom 2 was slotted for 2020, I was like, okay, cool. But now today we have confirmation 100% that Tom Hardy is back. And, for one, I think we knew that was going to happen. I don't think they were ever not going to bring Tom Hardy back, considering the movie had a smaller budget, went on to completely overgross with over $860 million. Most of it coming out of China, going to show that that was a successful thing. And as I pointed out before, Venom's success is the worst possible outcome that could have happened for Marvel, especially for the Spider-Man deal that is tentatively up for renewal between Sony and MCU. I mean, it's true, because even though that deal is predominantly for Spider-Man, the idea that Sony has to expand out their cinematic universe and have it run parallel to what's going on with the MCU to maybe one day bridge the gap is ever so much closer without Kevin Feige being in 100% control with this deal. Now, the deal was always going to happen anyway, right? The renewal of the contract was always going to happen. Tom Holland is beloved in the MCU, and it clearly is going to happen the way that whole thing was going to go down, 100%. But it was all about who was going to have more control and who was going to have more say-so. Because Venom was good, well, good is subjective, fun. Because Venom was fun and because Venom was successful, Amy Pascal can now argue that to Kevin Feige to either drive up the price or to have more executive control over what happens in these films when they eventually cross over, because it is going to happen. It is simply a matter of time. Now, it says here that Pascal has provided an update saying, for one, Tom Hardy will return to star in the sequel, saying, I can say that Tom Hardy will be back, magnificently playing the character as no one else can, which I have to 100% agree with. Hardy throws himself into these roles as he did with Venom. And what I really do enjoy about what they're going to be doing with the next Venom is, keep in mind, one of the biggest problems story-wise with this Venom, this last movie, had more to do with the fact that it was kind of more of a romantic film. That was one of the angles that they were really going for. And it makes sense in these kind of stories. But what really stuck out was the dark humor, the dark comedy, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde approach to the whole thing. And that was one of the major things that worked really well for it. And so that's what they're focusing on this time around, which makes me very happy and very curious to see what's going to be kicking off. Now, Pascal went on to describe what she believes contributed to Venom's success, saying it's a couple of things. One of them is that Sony did a great job creating the franchise and giving it life and giving it its own world, which I do think had a lot to do with the fact that the budget was so low. Ruben Fleischer and Tom Hardy worked well together because they came as a package deal. And I think Sony more or less kind of said the oversight wasn't there so much. Kind of like 20th Century Fox and Deadpool back in 2015. They gave him $50 million, said, go have fun. We'll hopefully recoup our costs. And at the end of the day, if we make a little bit of money, it's all good. And the film went on to do over 700 million worldwide. If these executives at these studios will just F off from these productions, perhaps the creatives have a chance to actually work within a modest budget and make a lot of money. And then it works out well for everybody. Just saying. Just saying. She says, then there's Tom Hardy. When you think of Venom, you'll never be able to think of anyone but Tom Hardy sitting in a bathtub of lobsters. Once you saw Tom Hardy do this in character, that's all you needed to know, which, yeah, I like that scene. And I think that was actually his own idea too. Like that was his idea on set, was to jump in this bathtub full of lobsters. And I thought the scene was pretty good. Now, she did talk about the possibility of Venom and Spider-Man sharing a screen together, but it was unclear if it would be Tom Hardy's Venom and Tom Holland's Spider-Man when it came time. The two characters once shared a screen together in Spider-Man in 2007. And Kevin Feige had recently said that it was likely. So yes, that means that the conversation about the future of Sony and Marvel in regards to this particular franchise and these particular characters, because we know at this point that Sony is not going to sell the rights back to Marvel. Sony right now, their main franchise, their main course of income, I think, and is pretty much Spider-Man. This is what they're banking on, because here's what you have to know about Sony. Sony bought the rights to Spider-Man from Marvel for like what I feel are literal pennies back in the 90s, because Marvel was falling on hard times and needed the money, so they just sold off these rights thinking, no one's ever going to see these movies. Now it's the predominant pop culture franchise in the world, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. If you look at the Spider-Man Far From Home reactions, goddamn, it's looking like it's going to be another great entry into the franchise, into the overall MCU. So what you have is Sony as a whole sucks. Sony Columbia Pictures sucks. Men in Black, it's bombing. It's a good movie, but it's bombing. A couple summers ago, they had Spider-Man, they had Baby Driver, they had Dark Tower, they had the Emoji Movie. Dark Tower and Emoji Movie crashed and burned. Baby Driver, Edgar Wright's $30 million small film, did pretty well for the budget, which is why it's getting an unnecessary sequel, I think, at this point. But Sony also, from 2016, had to write down $980 million in losses because they up by pushing Ghostbusters and everything else. Sony as a company, as a movie studio, is terrible. Sony as a company in general is pretty terrible. They don't make a lot of money outside of PlayStation, and I think some insurance companies in Japan, if I recall correctly. So they need this kind of money, this kind of success. So cozying up to Marvel makes the most sense in the world. Cozying up to Marvel absolutely makes the most sense in the world. But they gotta win. They got to win. And so now Disney, Bob Iger, can't basically offer up a price to buy back Spider-Man, because that ultimately is one of the things I think they're planning on doing at some point in time. If Venom would have failed, if Venom would have tanked, they would have at that point said, okay, we can't do this without Sony or without Marvel. We need that. We need it to be a thing. And then potentially Bob Iger could have come in and negotiated with Tom Rothman and bought the rights back. Now, and what you need to know about this, about there being some precedent for this, is when Sony bought the rights for Spider-Man and all those characters from Marvel back in the 90s, with it came the merchandising rights. But then in the mid-2000s, when Sony was on some hard times, this was the mid-2000s, this is like a couple years ago, when Sony was on some real hard times, well, you know what they did? They sold the merchandising rights back to Marvel. They sold the merchandising rights, which is the one thing Disney cares about most, really. They sold that back to Marvel because they were on hard times. They wouldn't sell back the characters. No. But they sold back the merchandising rights. So that means that every time there's a Spider-Man movie through Sony, the merch all comes from Disney and Marvel. That's why there's a bigger push than anything we saw with 20th Century Fox and X-Men, because Disney had no reason to even remotely enter into that kind of agreement with them when they were a rival studio. Now Disney owns 20th Century Fox, so it's all, it's all going to be under one umbrella and everything else. But that's what I'm talking about here, is Tom Hardy and Tom Holland being on screen together, being in this kind of universe, is going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I think we're going to find out more very soon. And I mean soon, I mean a couple weeks. And I mean Comic-Con Hall H Saturday, the Marvel panel. That is going to be the creme de la creme, the biggest of the big. And that is where we're going to find out what's going on with Phase 4. Does it include Sony? I don't know. They might announce at that point in time the renewal of the contract with Sony, because that would be coming right off the release a couple weeks after Spider-Man Far From Home came out. That's going to be a good time while Spider-Man hype is still high to push that deal. Also to formally announce, anything involving Venom 2 and jumping on board with that, and then finding a way to merge it all together. I think that's where it's going. We know now with the multiverse theory, with the multiverses in Spider-Man Far From Home, that is kind of what they're talking about. I don't know. I haven't seen any spoiler reviews yet, and I'm not looking, but I don't know if that's a real or fake thing. If it's real, that's how they're going to bridge the gap. But any way you look at it, any way you look at it, it'll be very fascinating to see what happens next. So Venom 2 confirmed, Tom Hardy confirmed. I gave you way so much information on this one, but I do want to hear your thoughts. Do you want to see Tom Hardy and Tom Holland in a movie together, running parallel to the MCU with Sony in control of it? How do you want to see it go about? Let me know down in the comments. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a fantastic day, and peace out.